I'm Zoe. This is my channel, Autistic Nana. Welcome. Today I want to talk about something called paracetamol, or paracetamol, or Tylenol, or Panadol, whatever you want to call it. I'm sure that many of you will know that I have a reason for wanting to talk about this. I'm not going to be too specific here. I just want to state some facts. I like facts. My first fact is that it's a very early description of someone that possibly had autism spectrum disorder. This description is not a scientific description. It is not a medical description. It is a description from lawyers, a judge, witnesses, in a court case from 1747. The case is the case documented by the Scottish courts against a laird, which is a lord to you and me. This man was called Hugh Blair of Borg. I doubt it's the Borg. I mean, I'd be very terrified if it really was the Borg. But Borg, Borge, B-O-R-G-U-E. Pronounce it how you will. It's Scottish. I have no idea. The case and the legal record described a very wealthy Scottish laird whose family sought to annul his marriage on the grounds of idiocy. So, autistic people, try not to get offended here. I'm not saying that we're all idiots. The evidence given on behalf of the family against this Hugh Blair was that he had a lifelong social aloofness. He used literal speech. He had obsessive routines, an extraordinary memory for detail, and difficulty with social reciprocity. So modern scholars view this as one of the clearest historical cases of autism. And I think from the description you can see why. But obviously it wasn't a medical description. Autism hadn't been identified officially at that point. So this is not medical fact, but I thought I would include it. There is a case of the wild boy of Aveyron. Now, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right because it's in France. But there was someone called Jean-Marc Gaspard Itard from France who reported on the case of Victor, who was described as a feral child found in the woods in southern France in 1799, I believe. He had no spoken language, poor eye contact, indifference to people, but a fascination with objects and sensations and resistance to change. Now, some of those things could be attributed to autism spectrum disorder. But in that case, I'm quite reticent because if he had indeed grown up as a feral child in the woods, which is what the assertion is, then surely he wouldn't have a spoken language. He wouldn't have learnt that eye contact was a thing. He wouldn't be interested in people. And he probably would be reticent to change and fascinated with objects and sensations. I mean, I can't argue definitively that that case in 1799 is evidence of autism spectrum disorder, but there are mirrors there, I will admit. In 1801, Philippe Pinel of France again wrote a medical philosophical treatise on mental alienation. He described something that he called idiotism, with cases of children who spoke little, avoided social interaction, and showed repetitive gestures. Again, this is 1801. This is children showing evidence or signs or traits of autism spectrum disorder. Next, we are going to move to the UK in 1846, and there is a man called Henry Maudsley who wrote early notes on imbecility. So his writings were on imbecility and insanity of early life. I'm trying not to get offended here, but I'm going to carry on. He wrote about children with profound social withdrawal and intense and narrow interests. This is 1846. This is 100 years before Hans Asperger and Leo Kanner. Next, I am going to move to John Langdon Down, who is also in the UK, and this is cases from 1887. Again, lectures on idiocy in childhood. He described developmental arrest with echolalia, which is interesting. That's the first one we've had of those, which is repeating sounds that make you calm. He described rigid routines and an absence of social imagination in children of normal appearance that were distinct from Down syndrome. I think Down syndrome is included as a neurodiversity and can be linked to autism in some cases. Now I'm moving to Austria. Heller in 1899. He wrote a report on dementia infantilis, later called Heller's syndrome. He described typically developing children who lost speech and social responsiveness, a regressive pattern still part of the autism spectrum, now childhood disintegrative disorder. Okay, so this is 1899 in Austria. After this, we move to 1906 in Switzerland, and we've got Eugen Bleuler. I don't know if that's how you say that. I'm really sorry if it's not. He coined the term autismus to describe self-focused withdrawal in schizophrenia. Though used for adults with psychosis, Bleuler's concept of autistic thinking influenced later child psychiatric usage. So there you go. We've got the first use of a word that even sounds like autism. Autismus. Moving to the 1920s, and now we have a Russian lady. I have no idea how you pronounce Russian names, but here we go. Grunya Sukhareva. I don't know if that's right, but that's how I'm going with it. Now, she published detailed cases of socially aloof but intelligent boys. I think she published in Russia in 1925, and in German, I think it was translated to German in 1926, if I remember correctly. Anyway, she did excellent early clinical descriptions of what we would now call high-functioning autism, or what was known as Asperger syndrome. And she was she was nearly 20 years ahead of Hans Asperger himself. I have no idea why this poor woman gets ignored, and we only ever hear about Leo Kanner and Hans Asperger. But this lovely lady, Grunya Sukhareva, if that's how she pronounced her name, actually described what we would call autism spectrum disorder in 1925. Okay, so from there, 1925 in Russia, we can move to, let's think, who's next? It's got to be Hans Asperger. I think Hans Asperger and Leo Kanner were overlapping in their studies. I don't think they spoke to each other about it. In fact, I think Leo Kanner absolutely ignored the fact that Hans Asperger even existed, even though I think some of Hans Asperger's colleagues eventually went to work with Leo Kanner. But anyway, we had Hans Asperger in Austria, we had Leo Kanner working out of the USA. Around 1943, 1944, they described early infantile autism and autistic psychopathy. They had a formal diagnostic framing. Leo Kanner blamed refrigerator mothers. Hans Asperger noticed that the parents of these children often had very similar traits. So he didn't blame them. I think he saw evidence of heredity. Heredity. Okay, so my point is, all these cases predate the use of paracetamol or paracetamol, however you want to pronounce it. Although it was first invented in late 1800s, it wasn't marketed until the 1950s. All of these examples that I have cited that are cases of possible, probable children and adults with signs of autism spectrum disorder predate the commercial use of paracetamol in the UK and the USA, Australia, Europe, anywhere else in the world. No one was using paracetamol until the 1950s. So would you like to explain to me where all these other cases that seem very, very much like autism spectrum disorder actually came from. I am autistic, and my son is autistic. And one of my sensory sensitivities is swallowing tablets. So I can 100% guarantee that when I was pregnant with my son, I did not take paracetamol in any form at all, because I would have been sick, and I absolutely hate being sick. So therefore, why is my son autistic if I didn't actually take paracetamol? Thanks for listening, and goodbye.